Welcome to Your Infinite Health. Are you getting older?
Are you feeling it?
How would you like to do that in reverse?
We're your host,
Dr. Tripp
and Lene.
We've run an integrative medicine practice for 13 years.
Together, we have 60 years of combined experience helping clients.
We've helped tens of thousands achieve success in health and live longer, happier lives.
In this show, we'll cover peer-reviewed and evidence-based integrative approaches to creating the health you've always wanted.
We also share professional experience we see in the field every day.
So if you're ready to feel, look, and live your best life, you're in the right place.
Welcome to Your Infinite Health podcast.
Hey, Lene.
Weekend plans?
Yeah, I'm probably going to catch up on mi español.
Mia Espanol via Duolingo.
Sí.
Are you still number one in your little pack?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, at least you're number one there. Kidding.
Oh,
Kidding.
oh, hurt me.
Hurt you. Hey, I know you didn't see this coming, but I have a joke.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Where do pirates buy their hooks?
Yeah. I don't know, dear.
From the secondhand store.
Oh,
You know.
we need to have a little sound there.
I know. I need to get fancy and learn how to do
Drum roll and a
sound effects. Yeah. Well, I don't want to waste our guest's time, so let me get to him. Listener got a great guest on for you today. I think you're going to learn a lot. His name is Elwin Robinson. He's coming to us from Great Britain. He is the founder of Genetic Insights, a pioneering company that leverages genetic testing to offer personalized health and wellness strategies. His journey into the health sector was catalyzed by personal health struggles that conventional medicine failed to resolve. This experience, combined with over a decade of expertise in health and wellness businesses, led him to the transformative potential of genetics in health optimization. Elwin's mission with Genetic Insights is to empower individuals with profound insights into their genetic makeup, enabling tailored approaches to diet, exercise, and lifestyle that promote vitality and longevity. His work is driven by a passion for helping others understand and harness their unique genetic potential to enhance their quality of life. Welcome, Elwin. All right, Elwin, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to share your expertise with our listeners.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah. So I know that I had read that you had some health issues and that kind of prompted you or catalyzed you into your interest in the genetics industry. Was hoping you could go a little bit into detail about that for our listener so we can learn a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. My parents are both into health, big style. My dad's had me on a strict macrobiotic diet for the first 4 years of my life, for instance. He had an organic food store back in the early 1980s when almost no one did, and was teaching organic agriculture in the late 80s. I was a rural science teacher. So you could say it's in my blood a little bit. But the thing that really brought me to genetics was I had been doing pretty well with my health. In my late 20s, I decided to stop drinking, stop smoking, stop eating junk food, all of the usual health advice that you're kind of given in the mainstream. And it actually worked pretty well. And I was on like a strict no processed food diet and all that. And I was doing pretty well and happy and healthy. And I had a health business and I was touring the world speaking and all this kind of cool stuff. And that was throughout my 30s. And then just before my 40th birthday, I started to get a really bad stabbing pain in my kind of right rib cage area. And I was quite familiar with Chinese medicines, as well as Western. And I thought, it sounds like the liver, right? So I went to a medical doctor. They did a CT, MRI, bloods, all of that kind of stuff, endoscopy. Could not find anything wrong. I went to all kinds of other medical doctors. I went to all kinds of alternative doctors, functional medicine, naturopath, that kind of thing. Biome specialist I went to. And I thought it might be a structural issue. So I went to physios, acupuncturists, osteopaths, craniosacral therapists, all of those kind of people. And none of those helped me. And I was, maybe it's an emotional problem. So I started to go to therapists and spiritual advisors and, you name it, like emotional wellness and this and that. And basically nothing was the answer. And this was a particular type of pain. And once I tell you what it is, you guys are doctors, I'm sure you'll be familiar with it, although very few people are. It was a type of pain that, because I think the stat is 50% of people over 40 have chronic pain. So this is hardly unusual to be in pain. But this was a specific type of pain that I had that did not respond at all to painkillers. And so the usual kind of NSAIDs didn't do anything. And usually if someone has a stabbing pain and NSAID isn't working, you give them an opiate sooner or later, eventually, right? But this specific type of pain actually was made significantly worse by opiates. So there was actually no type of painkiller that was effective for it. And as I said, I thought at some point it was a structural pain because it was around the ribs, but it definitely affected my eating. And so every time I ate, it got worse. And I'm tall, I've always been thin, I'm usually about 160 pounds. Well, I got down to 130 pounds, being 6'3". I was very underweight, emaciated, and I felt cold all the time. I had huge amounts of anxiety, and I was a nightmare for a doctor, because the doctor in the emergency room, there was a few times, and well, oh my God. And they just thought I was this crazy hypochondriac, I think, because they just couldn't work out what was going on with me. And I did a huge amount of testing, as the private testing, because what they offer you here in the normal health service is not very robust compared to in the US, in my country, England. So I paid for a lot of private testing, nothing worked. Anyway, one day I was just kind of browsing. I was pretty much researching health all day and all night, because what else are you going to do if you're in too much pain, you can't sleep and you can't work and all the rest of it. And I came across this thing about genetic testing. And they said, if you've ever done a service before, like 23andMe or Ancestry or something like that, you can upload your data to our system, and within a few hours, we'll be able to give you all of this incredibly detailed information. And I was skeptical. I think a lot of people probably would be, but I was desperate. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a try. And I did it. And I remember back in 2013, so at that time, 8 years ago, I'd done 23andMe, and I managed to dig that out. And I was just blown away. And I was blown away at how accurate it was. I was blown away at how helpful it was. And I was also blown away because it kind of predicted that I would have several of these health challenges, and also much more specific things, which we can get into if you want. Like, it knew that I was going to have specific nutritional deficiencies, even down to specific amino acid deficiencies or specific micronutrient deficiencies. It knew that I was going to have an issue of buildup of specific toxins. It knew that I was going to have specific hormonal imbalances, as well as being able to predict symptoms. And I was just like blown away at how accurate it was, again, comparing it to the actual testing that I'd done quite a lot of by then, blood tests and stuff like that. And yeah, it was the first thing that actually helped me. And I thought maybe I'm a fluke. So I tried it with my wife. I tried it with several friends, several business partners, every employee that let me, every family member that let me, and then eventually clients and stuff like that as well. And yeah, I've just been consistently blown away with how extremely accurate and helpful it is. And I don't think it takes the place of anything that people like you guys do. I'm a big fan still of doing as much extensive blood testing as is necessary, and saliva and urine and every other type of testing. And in fact, I recommend people do that to confirm what they see in our genetic reports. But I am, for the bang for your buck, for the amount of money you pay, for the amount of helpful information you get with genetics, I'm blown away at how incredibly broad and detailed it is possible. And yeah, because of that, I decided to set up my own company, Genetic Insights, to help as many people as possible get this, as far as I was concerned, life-changing information.
So did you buy the company that you used, or you set up another one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So licensed, I really liked what they were doing, but I felt it was more geared towards practitioners. It was super, super complicated, and it was also fairly expensive. So I worked out a deal. It took 2 years to build the integration, so it's not a simple matter. But where we take the information, simplified the interface significantly, and also made it available at a way lower price for the end user. So basically made it so it's actually available for the average person and affordable for the average person.
And the average person can interpret the results, because I've done a couple, like I've done a nutrigenomic test, and I'm like, that was fun. I don't know what any of these color codes mean.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, the more practitioners I speak to, it seems like most of you guys, unfortunately, have been sold on using types of testing, which, and it's not just you guys, I mean, to be fair, even a lot of end users that are very impressive if you don't know that any of this stuff is possible. You're like, wow, I've got this SNP, I've got MTHFR, I've got COMT, I've got this, I've got that. And it's all very interesting. But actually, there are, millions of SNPs potentially. And so drawing any conclusion from any one SNP, as a lot of these systems do, is first of all, as you say, very complicated. The person almost needs to have a degree in biochemistry to even understand it. And then second of all, it's not even very accurate and helpful because there are so many. And so what our reports do is they make the calculation for you and then simplify it. So I'll give you an example. If you're interested in heart health, that's one of the number one or number two thing that kills a lot of people, right? So a lot of people might be like, oh, well, I'm going to learn about this one specific SNP or this SNP to see if I have a ApoE or something like that, to see if I have an increased chance. If you look at our heart health report, we have a team of several dozen full-time AI engineers, several dozen full-time research scientists who can, consistently updating everything as new information becomes available, who will look at millions of SNPs, and it is over 1 million in the case of the heart health report specifically. And they'll go, okay, this SNP, according to all the evidence, it has this much weighting, it has this much probability of having this much impact. And so we're going to measure that against everything else. And then we're going to come up with a risk score that kind of compares all the relevant SNPs, rather than just saying, you have this SNP, so therefore you have this tendency, and maybe you need to have this supplement or something like that. So we can say that based on calculating over 1 million SNPs, you are in the top 25 percentile of having heart disease, or you're in the bottom 10 percentile of having heart disease. So we can come up with a risk score that's actually accurate while interpreting as much data as possible rather than just one line of code. And although that sounds way more complicated maybe than what we used to, it's actually way simpler because we've done all that complicated computation in the background, and we are just coming up with a bottom line, here's your percentage risk score. And then we do list some of the most important SNPs for people who want to do their research, but that's almost like that's not necessary. And then the main bulk of our reports is recommendations, because if all we could do is give risk scores, I wouldn't be in this, because I think one of the biggest resistances people have is, I don't want to know. And of course, if there's nothing you can do to change it, then why would you want to know?
I run into that a lot. People are literally scared of information. It boggles my mind.
But there's some validity to it, right? The placebo effect is significant. The power of the mind is significant. There's lots of research to demonstrate that. So if you're told you're in the top 10% chance for something serious, the mind can almost exacerbate that and create that to some degree. So it's not good. So as I said, if that's all we could do, I wouldn't have dedicated my life to this. But the other thing that we do, and the majority of our report, is actually recommendations. And they're presented in the order. A lot of the recommendations tend to be the same no matter who it is. But let's say you were to both do this and you compared your reports to each other, you'd see a lot of similarities, but the order would be different. So for one person, maybe doing a ketogenic diet is the most important thing to improve their heart health. For another person, maybe it's high intensity interval training. For another person, maybe it's magnesium supplementation. It's usually not a supplement as number one, but depending on the person, there's different recommendations. And what's so helpful about that is then rather than it being, potentially disempowering, it's empowering. And I'm 100% convinced of the accuracy, and I'll tell you why. So we have over 500 reports. We can sort them by risk. So right at the top of this list, we'll see a lot of like red flags, like warning, danger, stuff like that. And so you can easily see all those high risk ones at the top. And the ones that you have the highest risk score for. So I'll give myself an example. Right at the top of my list is like sinus problems. And then if I open the report and look at it, it says, you are the 99th percentile for having sinus problems, meaning in a room full of 100 people, I would be the most likely to have sinus problems, right? And it's true. If ever I'm not optimal, one of the first things that goes wrong for me is that I'll have sinus issues. And it's validating to see that, okay. And for someone else, it may be depression. For someone else, it may be headaches. For someone else, it may be urinary tract infections. For someone else, it may be fatigue or whatever it might be, right? There's all kinds of different ways that things may manifest. So to go back to what I was saying about why I'm convinced about the accuracy, and to go back to what I was saying about recommendations, I tend to go through people's results with two different types of people. The first is normal people who probably have been struggling with something a long time, just like I was. And when I say normal, I mean people who can't dedicate their whole lives to health. You know, they've got a family, they've got a job, whatever. And what I see is by the time they're in their late 30s or 40s, or older, of course, they usually have manifested already most, if not all, of those high risk scores. There's one exception to the type of person that I see regularly where it's not the case, and that is health influencers. So when I talk to people who have been spending several decades maybe committing themselves to healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, healthy protocols, detox, whatever, I'm always a little bit more, less confident going through their results, because sometimes I'm like, you have a high risk of that? I go, no, never had that. High risk of that? I'm like, no. And it seems like the reports are not as accurate because they're saying this stuff. But then we look through it and we look at the recommendations. It's okay, here's the number one recommendation. They're like, yeah, I'm doing that. Here's the number two. Yeah. So usually they're doing at least 6 or 7, often 8 or 9 out of the top 10. And this explains to me why, despite having a high risk score, maybe a very high risk score, like me with sinus issues, they haven't manifested that problem. And that really is very heartening to me to see as well, that it really does work when people consistently do those recommendations over a long time. Obviously, if you've had a problem for 40 years and then you start doing a recommendation for 2 weeks, it's not necessarily going to turn it around. But for those people who are really committed to health and who do it for a long time, it really makes a difference.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it reiterates that taking a proactive approach actually is mitigating what could be if you weren't being proactive.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so are y'all doing like a whole genome sequencing when you do the test, or what exactly somebody sends in for a test? How do they proceed?
It's not whole genome, but it's way more than a lot of those services where they just tell you a handful of SNPs or something like that. Like you can add on to a Genova test or something like that. It's basically a similar level as 23andMe and Ancestry and those kind of services. It's not whole genome, but a lot of the genome is like identical between me and a mouse or whatever. Like it's as much of the genome that is generally relevant, and it's the vast majority of SNPs where there was actually research behind it. A lot of that data, they call it junk DNA. It may well not be, right? It may be super important, but we don't understand it. We don't have research behind it.
We don't know yet.
We don't know, so we
don't.
call it junk. We don't know what that
But yeah, it does. It's not full genome, but yeah, certainly. Like ironically, when people say, "Oh, can I use the results I already got?" I usually say, "Was it from a health service or an ancestry service?" If they say ancestry service, I say, "Yeah, it almost certainly will work with ours because they do sequence a lot." If it's with a health service, I say, "Probably not, because they probably only sequence a handful or a dozen, and that's not what you need."
That's particularly it.
Oh, a glycanage would not correlate.
Probably not, unless you've got a document with millions of lines on it, then it's probably not going to be the thing.
Okay, but you don't have to do a whole new test if you've had 23andMe. You just upload your results.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what's so cool about it to me. And I know not everyone has done it, but a lot of people have. And then you can get this amazing amount of information, as I said, within a few hours. If you haven't done it before, I tell people, look, you're free to go and use 23andMe or Ancestry or anyone else. I'm very happy for you to compare their service to ours. I had to show it to one person to be on the platform for legal compliance. She wasn't interested in the health at all. But at the end of it, she goes, wow, this is what I wish 23andMe had been. You know, it's like all this information, like they don't tell you very much, those services. So I said to people, if you want to use those services, feel free. But if just purely from the point of convenience or to have all your data in one place, or you trust us more, then we also do offer DNA kits where people can purchase those from us and then send them off, and their genome will be uploaded automatically to our system.
What's the turnaround time on somebody who sends a kit in?
It's a great question. We used to say like 4 to 8 weeks, which is very similar to all the other services. Recently, it seems to have been significantly quicker. I don't know why that is, and I can't guarantee it still will be by the time we're watching. So let me just say 4 to 8 weeks. But it can be quicker.
Higher throughput methodologies coming through. Yeah.
I hope you're right. I thought it might be because 23andMe's business had, created so much that there was just more, there was less use for the lab that kind of does most of these companies. But I hope it's that they become more effective and efficient, because that would be great. Because that's really the biggest friction point for our business, is how long people used to have to wait to results. If it's like 2 months, it's a long time.
It is a long
You
time.
look at the first complete genome that was done, cost like $250,000 or something like that after the Human Genome Project was done. And now the things are becoming you wanted. So really neat stuff. And services like yours are amazing because it gives so much information. I heartily support these things. So, although, what was it? I guess criminals who have left DNA on the crime machine might not want to.
Don't be a criminal if they're doing these things.
Let me address the privacy one, as you just said that, because that is one of people's big concerns. So I said to people, I'm not Julian Assange, meaning that if a government agency comes to me and says, if you don't hand over this data, we're going to throw you in jail indefinitely, I probably would do it, to be honest. But I've not heard of that ever happening. I don't think it would. And that would be the only circumstances under which we would give people's data. It would be if we were legally required to do on threat of imprisonment in the country in which we operate, which is the UK, which is not known for that kind of behavior. Otherwise, your data is 100% private. One advantage I would say about our company over others as well is literally the only people who have access to the back end are myself and our head of operations, Jessica. We keep it that way. We do have a customer service team, but we don't let them actually go in the back end and have any access to that kind of thing. So I think where there's leaks and stuff like that, it's because when there's thousands of employees, we're probably on close to minimum wage, you all have back-end access to help you reset your login and stuff like that. It's very easy for potentially problems to occur. I don't know if we'll be able to keep that going forever, but my commitment would be that at least anyone who had back-end access to your data is a shareholder in the company. So there'll never be someone who hasn't got a significant stake in your data being secure who has access to it. And that's something I think that we offer that probably no other company does.
No, it's great that you actually said that and to allay that concern on the front end. For sure.
Yeah.
I want to get a little deeper into the recommendations though. So somebody gets their report and they have a whatever the risk may be, allergies or something like that. The recommendations are going to go through what a nutritional component, a physical fitness component, a supplement component. Does it get into a hormone component? Does it get into a mindset component? Are all those factors addressed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we don't give drug recommendations. That's in the medical realm, but we give lifestyle, dietary, and supplement. And lifestyle, could include emotional components. Psychotherapy is something that's frequently recommended, sometimes a specific type of therapy, for instance, because there is evidence that it works. Anything where there is research that it works, especially in relation to a specific SNP or a specific combination of SNPs, will likely show up on our reports. I said that we organize them in order of priority for your unique genetics. That is the case, but there is another variable. So every recommendation is also scored between 0 and 5 for 2 factors or variables. One of them is the level of impact that it is likely to have, and the other one is the amount of research that supports this specific recommendation. For instance, something like exercise for heart health, to go back to what we talked about earlier, that's likely to have a 5 on the evidence score, 5 out of 5, 5 out of 5 on the impact score, because there's lots of evidence and it has a very significant impact if you exercise versus not exercising. If we're putting in a supplement, for instance, magnesium or hawthorn or coenzyme Q10, maybe there's only a 2 out of 5 for evidence because not many studies have been done. Maybe that's a shame because the patent pharmaceutical system doesn't encourage a lot of recommendations, but it is what it is, right? There's not a large amount of research and evidence, so we're not going to say that there is. And then ditto with the impact, right? If someone wants to lose weight, then maybe a supplement like forskolin or something like that might be somewhere like 37th on the list because it may have a little bit of impact, but it's going to get like a 1 out of 5 score versus being on a specific diet or a specific exercise regime would be more likely to get a 5 out of 5 score.
Potentially ignorable.
Yeah. Definitely. And we say that supplements are very rarely in the top 10. I'm a big fan of supplements, but there just isn't the evidence and the impact, so that they're not normally there. Yeah. And I sometimes when there are hormones, to answer that question, which are potentially sold as supplements like DHEA or quinolone, they might be in the list, but if it's something like thyroxine, then that wouldn't be allowed on the list. So that's how we divide that.
Okay, so the medical recommendations leave to the physicians or the
Yes.
and but maybe suggest guidance by a practitioner or something of that nature.
Yes, and it does depend what it is. I've talked a lot about health risks, but we also talk about nutrient needs. 60 nutrients, every vitamin, every important mineral, every amino acid, every essential fat, you may have an increased need for. And I'll just share with you as an example. For me, I have an increased need for lysine, L-tyrosine, vitamin K2, not things that you would normally think of or test for or whatever.
Right.
But when I did actually test for them using a NutrIval test, in that particular case, it showed that I did have a deficiency on those, even though I didn't have a deficiency in any other protein. And in fact, in the case of lysine, I had to supplement like 5,000 milligrams a day, and it still showed that I was slightly deficient in lysine. I just had an increased need for lysine. I had increased need for tyrosine. Tyrosine is the building block of dopamine. It's also the building block of thyroxine. It's the building block of melanin. And I've been having alopecia symptoms and hypothyroid symptoms. As soon as I started up the tyrosine, I started to feel better, have more energy, all that kind of stuff. So even, a level of detail that you never would think is the stuff we get into. And with those, the recommendations would be foods and supplements, right? If you're low on tyrosine, here are tyrosine foods, or here are tyrosine supplements, potentially. Toxins, we don't do many of those, but we do some of the heavy metals.
By chance, I get a lot of requests from mold.
We have mold sensitivity, airborne and foodborne. Some people have one and not the other. Some people have both. And then histamine intolerance, salicylates, oxalate, all of that kind of stuff. And yes, some people don't deal with those poisons very well. For me, it said that I had a problem dealing with lead, and I can't remember, I think cadmium was the other one. I tested for it. Sure enough, the lead in my blood was 27 micrograms per deciliter. The normal range is 0 to 3.
Oh, wow.
And the level that you're considered needing hospitalization is 45 micrograms per deciliter by the World Health Organization. I went back to the doctor afterwards. I said, the normal GP over here that we have, the NHS GP. And I said, could all my symptoms be based on lead poisoning? And he goes, yeah, it's very possible. I said, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? And he said, we'll retest you in a year. Okay, thank you for
He
helpful.
said to stop licking the paint on the wall.
Yeah, with lead, what they think of is exposure, right? Because it's so difficult to detox. So they just talk about removing the exposure. But we tested my wife. My wife had been breathing the same air, eating roughly the same food, drinking the same water, eating off the same plates, taking the same supplements, roughly, without a massive variance for 10 years. Hers was less than 1. So we decided that it probably wasn't recent exposure. And lead has a half-life of 20 years in the body. If you have a low calcium diet, your body absorbs more than if you don't, and your body stores lead in the bones specifically. I got all this from the World Health Organization. This is not alternative health stuff.
Things, yeah.
Yeah, and DMSA, there's good evidence that those are effective. But yeah, so I think what was probably a case is I had a time-release poison capsule in the core of my body, in my skeleton. And so the crazy thing is, every time you do something to be healthier, like saunas, exercise, NRF2 upregulators, alpha lipoic acid, all that kind of stuff, it would actually increase the turnover, all that stuff, release more lead into my blood and make me feel worse. And so, yeah, that was a kind of crazy situation to realize that. But anyway, I don't think I had a massive exposure ever. I never worked in a refinery or whatever. And I have this genetic tendency to not deal with lead very well. And some people have a genetic tendency not to deal with lead very well. Some people have a genetic tendency not to deal with oxalates very well. Some people have a genetic tendency not to deal with histamine very well. Some people have a genetic tendency not to deal with mold very well, to go back to what you said earlier. And when you have that, sometimes your body can't deal with it and it builds up more and more. And depending on what it is, it puts it in different places. It tends to put lead in the bones. It tends to put mold in the fat, tissue specifically, or whatever, right? Different things build oxalates. It tends to build up as kidney stones and gallstones and all the rest of it. It's very important to know that information about yourself if your body can't handle a specific toxin.
Yeah. Okay. And so then are there recommendations for those if they show up?
A lot of times there probably aren't a lot of recommendations for it because we're finding with these things, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're finding these things and we're getting this new information. So we're on the threshold of actually being able to address many health problems that are presenting very subtly. And we have maybe not that much clinical knowledge based on.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah,
So
because all of our recommendations have to have that impact and research. And, on my podcast, I often speculate away about various things, as I'm sure you guys do. But in our reports, there's no speculation. Like, everything has to be FDA, FTC, whatever compliant. It has to be mainstream enough you can forward it to a normal mainstream doctor. They might ignore it, like they ignore almost everything, but at least they won't be able to make fun of it. It's all 100%. Every sentence has several citations. Yeah, because of that, with a lot of the heavy metals for other toxins, yeah, we don't put very much in there because we can't. You're absolutely right. Even though it's one of the most important things of our day and age. And I think toxic exposure is super important. Some people ask me, is obesity related to genetics? And I say yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that when my body goes wrong, I might be more likely to have sinus issues, but when someone else's body goes wrong, they might be more likely to gain weight, right? And that's fairly common. But there's a reason why 100 years ago we had pretty much the same level of calorie or maybe even higher calorie consumption than we do now, and yet we've got an obesity epidemic that's just blown up, especially beyond the 80s. And it's primarily toxic exposure. So it's the interaction of toxin exposure with genetics. So genetics do play a role. That's why no matter how unhealthy and toxic I got, I never gained weight because that's not in my genetics. But then it's certainly not caused by genetics. It's caused by toxicity and various other things.
It's how we're activating the genome.
Yeah, exactly. That's the
Or our
epigenetic
environment.
Yeah, that's the epigenetic part. Some people ask me, do we measure epigenetics? And the answer is no. We are basing on SNPs. SNPs are single nucleotide polymorphisms. They're like one little variation in your genetic code, one line of code. And there's something that is the same for the moment of birth to death. But as you were just saying, it's how or if it expresses that we can influence with our lifestyle and our environment and, whether we eat well and even things like emotional well-being, right? If we're happy most of the day, we're going to be healthier than if we're unhappy, angry or fearful most of the day. All these things do have an impact.
Right, for sure. Cool.
Love it.
What is one thing you would like the listener to know?
I would say if you're in the same position that I was, thinking that no one can help you, there is no answer out there, then don't give up hope. And I'm not saying that we definitely have the answers. It was the case for me, but it's not going to be the case for everyone. But please don't give up hope. Pray, manifest, focus, whatever it is that you believe in. But with the power of your mind and your spirit and your soul and whatever, keep focusing on being well. Don't ever give up. Keep listening to podcasts. Keep trying stuff. And as much as you can, try and maintain that attitude of it will happen. An attitude that I took on was when I was in the depths of this pain, and it was pretty bad for a while. I spoke to a woman who had the same issue, sphincter of body dysfunction, by the way. We didn't talk about that. It usually happens to women. And she said the pain was worse than childbirth. I cannot confirm or deny that, but it was pretty bad. So during that time when I had that pain, I remember saying to myself, I am visualizing a point at some point in the future. I don't know when. I'm actually going to be thankful for this pain, where I'm going to say, I'm so glad I went through this because it led me to this moment. That's something I've actually done over and over again over the last 15 years or something like that. Whenever, it doesn't have to be physical pain, it could be emotional pain, it could be adversity. It happened, remember, when I lost all my money and I was completely broken, homeless and all the rest of it. Like, whenever you're in that position of extreme adversity, visualize that moment, not just where things are okay again, but where you actually be grateful for whatever adversity you're going through. And my experience so far in doing a lot over 15 years has never failed to be true. And I am grateful I went through that pain now because it led me to something amazing that can really help people that I can share with wonderful people like yourselves.
That's a really great perspective. I've never had that perspective. So I'm going to take that from you. Because Lord knows I've got through some adversities. Cool. Well, where can the listeners find more about you?
If you go to geneticinsights.co, that's the service we've talked about today. If you're not ready to buy anything or do a genetic test, then just go and find me on youtube.com/Elwin Robinson. I have a podcast there. I'm also on Spotify and Apple and all the rest of it. But if you go to YouTube, I reply to all the comments there. So if you want to be chat, if you want to ask me any questions, that podcast is more topic-based. So whether you want to lose weight or you want to optimize your hormones or you want to improve your oral health or whatever it might be, or cardiovascular health, I have once every week, we have a specific topic. So even if you might not want to hear me talk about everything, if you want to hear my take on whatever it is you're currently struggling with, check out the channel and hopefully I've got an episode on it for you.
That's really cool. All right, listener, I'll have the deets in the show notes. So don't worry about that if you missed it. Elwin, thank you so much for joining us from the mother country over there. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's been really fun. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah.
Really great stuff. Really great stuff.
All right, listener, hope you found this educational, informational, somewhat entertaining. And until next time.
Thanks for subscribing to Your Infinite Health. I'm Dr. Tripp.
And I'm Lene. Until next time, feel it, look it, and live it.